Hi, my name is Eva Klockner, and for the past year, I have been volunteering in pastoral care at a local hospital. When I was in elementary school, I watched my dad go through the process of becoming a physician assistant in the emergency room, and I thought it was so cool how he had the opportunity to be close to people who were in their darkest hours so he could show them compassion and bring the light of Christ to them. And I really wanted to follow in his footsteps, but it just became evident very early in high school that I was not scientifically minded and was not going to be able to make it into medical school. So I decided to study theology, and in the midst of looking at careers for theology majors, I discovered hospital chaplaincy. And hospital chaplaincy was perfect for me because it was everything that I liked about the medical field and none of the sciencey stuff that I couldn't get into. So I began to pursue it. I began researching the kinds of education I would need to pursue it. And in the midst of this, my mom found an ad in our parish bulletin that a local hospital was looking for people to volunteer in their pastoral care department. The process of becoming a volunteer in the pastoral care department was actually very easy. I had to go through some paperwork, some background checks, and then it was 5 weeks of orientation with the head of chaplaincy and one of the other chaplains. And then I started shadowing one of the chaplains for about 5 weeks. And then after this 5 weeks, she said, I think you're ready to go into rooms and be with patients and pray with them by yourself. And so that's what I've been doing for almost a year now. Obviously, I have to be cautious about what I show in a hospital, but when I come, I put my stuff in a locker, and then I sign in, and then after I'm done signing in, I'll go get a list of patients from the chaplain that supervises me, and then I'll go and start seeing those patients. On the day of the video, I think I saw 14 patients, which is a lot for 2 hours. Sometimes my patients just aren't very talkative, and that's okay. You just need to go in and say hi and offer to pray with them, and sometimes they're in a lot of pain and they can't talk long and they don't really want you in the room, and that's okay too. You're there to serve them, you're there to be a presence. At the end of the day, I put every patient and what room they were in into a log, and then I just write a little bit about what I did. Usually I write like 2 words, and it's like visit and pray or something, just to show that I saw them and took care of them. I don't know if anyone actually reads these logs. To be honest, I have my doubts, but it's extremely helpful for me. I think it's one of the most important parts of my day because I am able to remember all of the patients I saw and see what they need for continuing care. So if I need to talk to my chaplain about maybe having another chaplain, a professional chaplain, go and see them, I can. And then I also remember to pray for them when I get home too, because it's not just about what happens in the hospital. It's about a continued spirit of prayer for people who are suffering. I think that every single person who works in a field where human suffering is prominent has some sort of way to cope with the things that they're experiencing. And for me, I've found that journaling is extremely helpful. So usually when I get home from the hospital, I will write a paragraph or 2 about the patients I saw that impacted me the most. If I remember their names, I don't use them just for privacy's sake. It just makes me feel better even if no one will ever read it. Sometimes I'll use an initial, I'll write what I saw, what I experienced, and then I'll write a prayer for that patient. And though I will continue to pray for them, and though I will always wonder how they're doing, if they're feeling any better, when I journal it just feels like a way of saying this is out of my hands and into God's, and I acknowledge that there is nothing more I can do to help them except pray. During my internship, the person that was supervising it wanted me to focus on grief, probably because the hospital had just started a new bereavement program for families of the deceased. And so he had me read the Grief Recovery Handbook. It's by John W. James and Russell Friedman. The book really changed a lot of my perceptions on grief, and I think that everyone should read it because the old Kubler-Ross, 5 stages of grief, is just not applicable to everyone. Some people go through stages all at the same time. Some people never go through the stages. Some people go through one stage over and over and over again. And it's just really important to know how to meet people where they're at, especially in hospital chaplaincy. As a society, we are very avoidant to grief. We see pain as inconvenient, and so when people are grieving, we are anxious to kind of put off their emotions because we don't really want to deal with them. And a lot of people do this without even realizing it, and this was something that the book was pointing out too. There are things that you shouldn't say to people when they're grieving that sometimes might be accepted things to say, but that doesn't make them right. That doesn't mean that it helps them more than it hurts them. So it outlined the things that you should say and the things that you shouldn't say, and I really took this part to heart, and I took notes so that I can better aid my patients who are struggling with loss, or aid the families of patients who are struggling with loss. I see a lot of patients who are still grieving death, and then I see a lot of patients who are still grieving other life events. And what I think is sad is that even though these things happened years and years ago, they still feel fresh, and the reason is probably because no one ever gave them space. They always had to hold it together. No one ever gave them permission to feel the feelings that they're feeling. And so I'm trying to get better at dealing with grief so that I can give them that space that they were not given before, and hopefully help them to start processing a little bit. A part of chaplaincy that's not really thought about or talked about much is that sometimes chaplains have to go sit in a room with doctors and family members when they receive bad news. And this actually happened on the second day of shadowing. So the chaplain I was with had to go sit in a room with a family as they were told that their family member, who was perfectly fine 3 days ago, was probably had days to weeks. And I remember the chaplain being so calm and so collected and such a good in-between for the family and the doctor who were struggling to understand each other. And she just reassured the family that she was there for whatever they needed. And I was honestly in awe. I thought, that is so cool. I want to be that good at this when I grow up. Education for hospital chaplains is very interesting because they have to go through all of the academic training that clergy members do with the residency that medical workers do. So all in all, it is a master's degree in religion or some kind of theology. It's seminary school in Protestant denominations. And then 1,600 hours of clinical residency. And then they have to be CPE certified, which comes at the end of their clinical residency. Among the topics that they have to be trained in are religious sociology and psychology. So from the time you get your bachelor's degree, it's about another 2 or 3 years. You can complete the CPE and the master's degree at the same time, but the chaplains that I talked to about this last year said that that was not a pleasant experience and they did not recommend it. So if I do go through this process, I will probably be doing them separately. I recently read a academic article by a woman named Martha R. Jacobs, and the article was about chaplaincy, and it was called "Why Are We Here?" I really liked this article because it reminded me a lot of the things that I learned in training. We as chaplains have the job to help people redefine a sense of purpose, a sense of identity, once that has been taken by illness or injury. We all have these certain meaning schemas that we assign to our lives. We judge ourselves based on what we can do, and we assign value based on those things. For example, you might be a student, you might be a teacher, you might be a mechanic, you might be a doctor, but what if illness or injury precluded you from doing those things tomorrow? It seems far-fetched, but for a lot of the patients I see, that's the reality, that's what they're living in. So how do we find meaning then in the suffering that we're experiencing? Because none of us are exempt, all of us are going to suffer. But what does it mean? And when all that's left is our belief in a higher power, how can we rejoice in that? How can we connect to our Creator? I don't really have the authority to answer those questions now, but as I grow in chaplaincy, I hope that I will be able to aid my patients more. But for now, I am here to listen. I am here to learn from my patients, and I have learned so much, and I am so excited to see what the future holds. For anyone who is thinking about getting involved in chaplaincy, even on a volunteer basis, I strongly encourage you to reach out to your local hospitals, because it's so interesting the amount of things that you can do just by volunteering. While getting CPE certified and becoming a full-time hospital chaplain enables you to do a lot more things. You don't need 1,600 hours of residency or a master's degree to sit with someone in their suffering. And I truly believe that hospitals need everyone. It's not something that's just for priests. It's not something that's just for pastors. We need priests, pastors, laymen, laywomen. Everyone who feels called to this needs to get involved. It costs absolutely nothing to be compassionate to someone who is in their darkest hours, and it is the most fulfilling thing that I have ever done.